develop Darkest Beast.
Darkest Beast, who's an A&R guy for Island Records in England, had heard this tape of Amy singing and sort of became obsessed with it.
He heard of Amy through her management company and was obviously young and sort of up for it, A&R man, because he definitely pursued her.
He said that he'd never heard anyone lyrically put it together the way she had, and she was this combination of Mahalia Jackson, Etta James, and Courtney Love, and he just sort of made it his mission to track her down and make her his.
He sort of had this instinct, you know, that Amy could be something totally different and new and fresh. He hooked her up with this producer who had worked with Nas, who was one of Amy's favorite rappers, and so that really helped develop her sound.
Amy had finally found a kindred spirit in the music industry. After signing her first deal with Island Records at age 19, Darkest wanted to show off his new protege at the record company offices in Hammersmith, London.
Darkest Beast quickly dragged her into the offices of Island Record, and she sang There Is No Greater Love with some acoustic guitar next to her, you know, just sitting on the sofa in the boardroom to the assembled masses. And the applause at the end is, you know, you can tell that she's really blown them away because, you know, she was so young and yet she had such a sort of rich voice.
With a six-figure advance from Island Records and EMI Publishing, Amy entered the studio in 2002, armed with a sound she could call her own and material that was painfully personal. The result was the stunning debut album, Frank.
Frank was a very solid, you know, sort of jazz-inflected retro soul record.
The sound of Frank is a slightly more mature kind of rhythm tracks with a narrative on top, which is the world through Amy Winehouse's eyes.
It had been an emotionally fraught time for Amy, and the songs on Frank directly reflect what was happening in her personal life.
She ended up dating this guy, Chris. It was her first real relationship, and she was 18 years old at the time, and he was 7 years older. So the relationship only lasted about 9 months, and when it ended, Amy was completely heartbroken and devastated.
A lot of great work emerges out of pain, especially out of heartbreak. And when Amy broke up with her boyfriend, as she was being signed, as she was starting to begin to pursue this career as a singer, you know, that opened her up emotionally, opened her up to something to write about, something to sing about.
It can be draining, but also it gives you energy. You can get energy from writing a song about something personal because you are kind of shaking it off.
Me Pumps was like the song that got attention, obviously. The music sounded one way and her voice sounded one way, but then the sort of lyrics were kind of a bit something else.
The song Stronger Than Me, she was berating an ex-boyfriend who was older than her, and she was saying, you know, you should be stronger than me, and, you know, she was basically calling him a wimp. And in fact, when she promoted the album, she would tell journalists what his name was and what his address was. And so she was already starting to come across as quite outspoken at this point.
When Frank was released in October 2003, critics and fans across Britain embraced it. The album would soon catapult the young singer to fame, but there was one critic who wasn't satisfied: Amy Winehouse. She was just 20 years old, but Amy Winehouse had already completed her first major label album. And she wasn't the only one smiling. Frank was hailed by critics and fans alike as a fresh new sound for British music.
At first, Amy really liked her debut album, Frank, and it was a highly critically acclaimed album.
The fans loved it. She was like a new Billie Holiday or like a new Erykah Badu.
Countless accolades followed, including 2 Brit Award nominations.
It is really exciting.
And a prestigious Ivor Novello Songwriting Award. But despite all the acclaim, one person wasn't so fond of Frank.
The album got great reviews, so everybody was very happy with it. The only person who was unhappy with it was Amy, who spent the entire promotional campaign telling people not to bother buying it because it was no good. You know, genuinely, not as a publicity stunt, she was really angry with it.
Without consulting Amy, the label had chosen only the lightest tracks for the album. and the final mix softened the hard edges of her jazzy R&B sound. This was not the album Amy had bargained for.
She was unhappy with the mixing, she was unhappy with the packaging, she just wasn't happy with everything about it.
Year, she was sent on the road to promote an album that she openly despised. Then in 2004, Island Records started asking for a follow-up. But before Amy would be ready to start work on a new record, she would need something first: a healthy dose of heartache. This time it came in the form of a dashing rogue, Blake Fielder Civil.
Blake Fielder Civil is a shady, shady character. He and Amy met at a pub in London, of course. Where else?
He'd just had a good win gambling on horses and wanted to celebrate. And as he opened up the pub door, the first person he saw was Amy Winehouse. And they caught each other's eye, and by all accounts, it was love at first sight. And they had a drink and drank more, and that was the story.
He's just this roguish guy in a pork pie hat and smoke in his mouth and pack rolled up in his sleeves, and one of those guys, he just looks like trouble.
They became very close very quickly, and she had a tattoo on her chest which was, said Blake's, so she's very much branding herself as his.
But what started as a love affair quickly spiraled downward.
Amy, before she met Blake Fielder Civil, would be so anti-hard drugs that there were stories of her, when people started even talking about them favourably, let alone taking them, her getting up and walking out the room in disgust, which is amazing to think. She'd smoked pot from her teenage years and she'd often liked to drink.
He was responsible for introducing Amy to hard drugs. Everybody knows this. Amy's told me this.
It seems like when Blake came into her life, he introduced a whole other set of drugs that are not functional drugs, like crack and heroin and a mix of them. And that's when things went south.
With the appearance of Blake Fielder Civil, Amy changed overnight. The sassy North London chanteuse became a drug and drink-addled catastrophe waiting to happen. After 6 intense months, Blake and Amy broke up, and things got even worse. By the time the media caught up with Amy in 2005, she was a changed person.
When we'd last seen Amy Winehouse, she was curvy, she was very clean cut, and she was really, really young and pretty looking, and she did re-emerge as something of a sort of almost a gothic scarecrow with a beehive. She wanted to have that edgy look, but it just got more and more. There were already more and more tattoos on her, and the press would photograph her clearly having self-harmed on her wrists. And already anybody who looked at pictures of her in the paper would be thinking, oh my goodness, what's happened to her? How long has she got? She became somebody who, when she was discussed, it was about what she was doing when she was out partying. It wasn't about her music anymore.
Yesterday's promising young star was now a tabloid target, and those in charge of her career could no longer ignore Amy's self-destructive substance abuse.
She begins drinking so heavily that her management is worried for her own health and certainly for the future of her career. They encourage her to get some help. She talks to her father about it, who says that he did his own time drinking and taking drugs, but that maybe she should consider getting help. And so she does consider it for exactly 15 minutes. She goes to rehab and stays for 15 minutes.
They suggested that she should go to rehab, which was a rehab clinic actually a stone's throw almost from where she grew up. And she had this conversation, with the guy on the door, and he said, "Why are you here?" And she said, "I don't know." And in the end concluded, that she was just a bit depressed. She'd broken up with her man and she was just drinking a bit too much. And her dad said as much to her. And so she didn't go to rehab.
She felt that whatever she was involved with, the drug addiction, she could handle it and she could stop it whenever she chose. I mean, clearly that, she was deluded.
It was a decision with disastrous results. Ironically, it would also lead her to the breakthrough single that would make Amy Winehouse an international star. In 2005, 21-year-old Amy Winehouse had embarked on a tumultuous relationship with Blake Fielder Civil that sent her on a downward spiral of substance abuse and self-destruction. Amy's management urged her to get help. Instead, she rejected rehab and just about everyone and everything else.
When her first management company tried to get her to go to rehab, that was a sign for her that she needed to cut those ties. She wasn't happy being told what to do, so she left and found herself a new manager.
There was this guy, Ray Cosbert, who had worked with Amy for a couple of years on her live shows, and he was just starting out with a management career and decided, you know, hey, Amy, do you want to work with me? I'm just starting my career as a manager. And she decided to say yes.
Her new management, it was basically stated implicitly or explicitly that they weren't going to force her to do anything that she wanted to do as far as cleaning up, and they were just going to let her be herself.
In early 2006, Amy officially parted ways with her first management company, Brilliant 19, and she was finally ready to make an album completely on her own terms, with a bold new producer, Mark Ronson.
One of Ray's first decisions was to hook her up with Mark Ronson. Now, Mark Ronson's this huge guy in the music industry.
Mark Ronson is a guy who's actually perfectly positioned to make the record that catapults Amy into stardom. Ronson was a DJ and a producer, and he understood how to take the music that Amy was interested in and bring a hip-hop DJ's perspective to it.
Amy had found a perfect match in her new producer, and in her troubled personal life, she'd found fodder for the most bracing songs of her career.
The kind of the upside of the heartbreak was that it gave Amy the inspiration to write more songs that became the second album.
Amy, when she went into the studio to record Back to Black, although, you know, she was very tormented by what's going on in her personal life, she was very confident. I think she'd really gained a sort of, I've got this album in me, and I'm going to put it out, and everybody's going to see me for what I really am, and there's not going to be any of the stuff that happened with Frank.
What Back to Black did was really establish a unique signature sound for Amy Winehouse. Working with new musicians, the Dap Kings, this fantastic neo-soul band in New York City. She had this sort of girl group feel, these old soul horns, this hip-hop attitude. All of these things came together around Back to Black.
There was songs such as You Know I'm No Good and Back to Black, which were very obvious songs about, you know, her relationship with Blake and the heartache that was caused.
Because Amy basically writes what's really happening, there's even a line on Back to Black, you love blow and I love puff. So, you know, she's sort of saying that one of the obstacles in their relationship is their sort of drugs of choice.
And it would be one of Amy's darkest episodes that would inspire her signature hit.
She was walking along with her new producer, Mark Ronson, and she said, they tried to make me go to rehab. I said, no, no, no. And he said, what did you just say?
There's just something about the line that just sounded like it was a song, and she was like, yeah, well, it just sort of rolled off her tongue. Another example of her just sort of mining what's happened to her in very bald language and turning that into a massive single.
Amy released Rehab on October 23, 2006, as the first single from her second album, Back to Black. And it didn't just burn up the charts, it ignited a cultural firestorm.
I ain't got the time, and if my daddy thinks I'm fine, try to make me go to rehab, I won't go.
That was the song that absolutely launched her from, you know, musical stardom into superstardom. Everybody suddenly knew her, and it was a great song.
The first time I heard it, I was just like, wow, this is either going to be really huge or it's going to flop completely. You know, but you know that it's not going to be in the middle. You could tell that people are going to have an extreme reaction to it.
Well, at a time of endless public confessionals, what the song Rehab did was open her up and show this defiant spirit and say, yeah, I'm not somebody who's going to apologize. You tell me I need to straighten up, I don't need to straighten up. I'm going to do what I want to do. And as a way to introduce her to a market, that clicked instantly.
From the record company's perspective, yes, it was great timing that she just happened to write that song at that time. But obviously she wasn't thinking like that. It's just what was on her mind during the 5 minutes that it probably took her to write it.
The album followed in the UK a week later, and it didn't just give her a #1 hit. It gave Amy a whole new public persona.
The Amy Winehouse of Back to Black is a different girl, certainly in appearance, than the Amy Winehouse of Frank.